I'm going to hand back over to Duane, who's going to introduce our International Science Advisory Panel and pick their brains. Thank you.
Kia ora, Helen. Wonderful. Hey, ISAP members, if you want to come up, grab a cosy seat. So we don't have everybody on the screen, but what I wanted to say with this panel is they've been through the duration of the challenge as sort of our independent scrutiny of what are we trying to do? Are there global examples we should borrow from? What do we contribute and so on? And so really it's a chance for them to give a perspective from their own experience. I'll let them introduce themselves. They're all incredibly productive individuals in their own right and a lot of experience. And so they'll give us some perspectives on the challenge and the role. And we might start with Dan on the end.
Thank you. Is that on? Yep. So you'll see my photograph wasn't up before. I'm not actually a member of the International Science Panel, but qualified here because I'm here from Australia and had the privilege of being a member of the governance group in Whanganui-a-Tara for, well, since 2013 actually, but when the bid for the challenge was first put in. So I'd love to make some, it's fantastic to have been a witness to the entire journey from the conception of the challenge through to the successful bid, through Tranche 1, through Tranche 2, and then seeing these results in this final day. So I'd love to make some comments about that as we go through the discussion today, but that's my brief introduction.
Kia ora tātou, ngā mihi nui, ko Catherine Febria taku ingoa, ko Filipina Painata iwi, ko Tagalog taku reo tuatahi, ko Turtle Island, Canada, e o noho ana. It's a privilege to be here. It's great to be back with the whānau in BioHeritage. So I was an early career researcher in Tranche 1, co-PI with Helen, Angus McIntosh as well, and this is the science system that raised me. So it's wonderful to be back here and just speak to the impact that the lateral kindness and collaboration that can emerge from a different way of doing science. So thank you, miigwech, for the invitation.
Kia ora, mani ngā pudni, nina mani. I live and learn and work on Whanganui-a-Tara, the land of the Kaurna people, the unceded land of the Adelaide Hills and Plains. And I acknowledge that their traditional beliefs and practices are important now, as they will be in the future and have been in the past. I'm a New Zealander, but my imposter syndrome is that I have now lived outside of New Zealand longer than I've lived in New Zealand. My heart still belongs to Whorikahu on the Coromandel in Waikato land. I'm a proud Chiefs supporter. I travelled to Melbourne recently to watch the Chiefs play. I'd like to talk a little bit about the role of the challenge internationally when we come to have a discussion. Thanks.
There we go. Good afternoon, everybody. And I'd also like to recognise the land that I've lived on from the last 30 years, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people around Canberra and the Australian Capital Territory. I share the characteristic with several of my colleagues here that I'm also an expat Kiwi and left in the mid-1980s. It's sort of a cultural reinsertion event every time I come back, and I enjoy it a lot. My first piece of research was looking at habitat fragmentation effects in Potocarp broadleaf forest just north of Auckland, and looking at microclimate edges and seeing how that changed the reproductive output of different species. And from there I moved to Canada, so I share something with Catherine and did my PhD, and then moved to Australia with my wife with the intention of gradually migrating back here, and we just never did. For the last 30 years I've been a scientist at CSIRO, and for the last 10 or so of those director of the National Biological Collections there. I guess my last point, I was really excited to be asked to come on board as a member of ISAP probably nearly 10 years ago now, and it's been an incredibly enjoyable journey seeing what's been going on. I was a little disturbed that the photo of me has an incredibly furry version of me, but that's okay. It means if I say anything that people don't like, I can probably escape incognito, because that will be the image that there is. So it's lovely to be here.
Kia ora, my name's Richard Duncan, and I'll continue the theme of being a New Zealander that moved to Australia. So I grew up in the science system here in Aotearoa. I actually grew up in Wellington. I did my PhD at the University of Canterbury, and I spent most of my career at Lincoln University until 11 years ago when I got offered a job at the University of Canberra, and I moved over, and I now live on Ngunnawal-Ngambri country around the ACT, just like Andrew. And again, I've been involved on the Science Advisory Panel since Tranche 1. And for me, it's been a really wonderful opportunity to stay connected with science in New Zealand, but also to see the evolution of science and how the way of doing science has evolved through this challenge. And I think it's been incredibly insightful to really understand how to do science in a different way that involves such strong community engagement and such strong Māori engagement. And I think there's been some tremendous outcomes of that, but I also think it poses some sort of ongoing challenges in how to maintain that momentum, and that's hopefully something we might be able to touch on in some of the discussion.
Thanks, Tim. I was going to rename the ISAP something about expat Kiwis gone to Australia, but there's a few exceptions here. So, but what we might do is sort of prepped the panel for a set of topics. Again, we might start with Dan just to sort of give an overview of some of that impact or that intervention logic or the weave that we've put up a few times. No, we've given Josh a pass because he gave such a good presentation yesterday. Yeah.
Thanks. So an opportunity to, I'll answer your question a little bit, but just to take the chance to seize the opportunity to reflect on sort of 10 years as an observer of what's gone on here. So when James Wilder got in touch with me in 2013 and asked me to be involved in a discussion that was part of potentially establishing a governance group for this new challenge, the thing that appealed to me was the concept of the challenges as a sort of experiment and a disruptor in the innovation system, and particularly about this idea of a mission-based approach to doing research. And it's been, and in the session after the afternoon tea, there'll be much more eloquent and authoritative sort of review of the 10 years, but I can't help having a little bit of reflection. I really feel the first 5 years was a period of learning and adaptation. So the mission to me is in two parts. There's the reversing the decline, and as we've heard manifestly, that's not achieved, but that doesn't mean it wasn't absolutely the right mission to be having as the headline item for all the reasons that people articulated. But the second was a step change in the way in which research is done. And I think from the 2 days that I've had the privilege of being here for yesterday and today, that step change has occurred, or a step change has occurred. I'd say it's absolutely not the step change that I might have predicted 10 years ago, which doesn't mean it's not an incredibly powerful step change and probably the right one. And I think, my big picture reflection is that taking that mission-based approach has allowed the challenges, and maybe this is the only one I can speak on in any detail, to be really crystal clear about what's being tried to be achieved, but very open-minded about how that should be achieved. So there wasn't a roadmap from year 1 to year 10. There was a blueprint for we'll do this, and then we'll do this, and then we'll do this. There was a period of, as I say, of exploration, adaptation, building relationships, exploring possibilities. I think then, at the end of Tranche 1, there was a real pivot point under the leadership of Andrea and Mel and lots of other people in this room to create the strategy for 2019 to 2024, which I reread yesterday. And that's an incredibly insightful document, was that, I think, really framed out what that step change should look like 5 years in, very importantly 5 years in. And I really have the sense that in the 5 years since, what was laid out there has been achieved. So to me, this idea of having a clear clarity around what we're trying to achieve, a mission-directed approach, but having enormous flexibility in how to achieve that's been a real hallmark of what's gone on here. And I should say, I didn't say in the introduction, most of my career has been, like Andrew, in CSIRO, the National Science Agency in Australia, and more recently a much smaller research funding agency in Australia, where think of what we're doing as very much mission-directed, but we're often shied away from being quite as flexible as we need to be about how we achieve what we say we're going to set out to achieve. So in truth, we often have the tools beforehand, and we set the mission that we're going to use our tools, our hammer, to nail in. So that's really, to me, one of the key sort of opportunities to see that playing out here, and something that is, I think, internationally highly relevant. I can maybe come back to that a bit later on.
Quite like what the impact is, what we think. Because I got distracted by this question.
And you come to relate it, right?
Yeah. Maybe I'll speak to I guess the global perspective from Turtle Island, Canada, and like the opportunity to see tranche one of BioHeritage, its impact within Aotearoa, and then, you know, in leaving and still continuing to be part of this this wonderful community. The question and the thing that is very clear is that there are places around the world, including Canada, where thinking and reflecting on our treaty responsibilities is a bar that we need to confront with as a society. And so I wanted to say that the work and the way that we've been trained as early careers to build relationships and to build partnerships, and that comes alongside, if not at the forefront, before we can even ask science questions. It makes our science better. That's sort of the way that I lead our research teams in Turtle Island. And I think that in a lot of ways, this is the bar, the global bar that is being set for research communities around the world. I also wear the hat during my time in Aotearoa, but also in Canada as part of IPBES, which is the UN platform for biodiversity and ecosystem services. And there are real protocols, and countries are listening to what are the best practices globally for how we can connect with biodiversity and ecosystem services at that science policy interface, and in Canada as well. And I'm not sure exactly how Aotearoa is doing it, but Canada has decided that the main way they can meet their biodiversity targets is to empower First Nations, who are already kaitiaki, the equivalent of kaitiaki in Canada, to meet, to even meet any sort of conservation goal, which is like 30 by 30. So I think in terms of whether or not BioHeritage, this whānau is leading globally, there are global ripple effects. And so I just wanted to encourage that the story that has to be told within Aotearoa, continue to share that with your global networks, because this science policy on the global scale is being written. And there are invitations and interests and priorities placed on task forces on how can we honor place-based Indigenous and local knowledge that countries are going to now be writing policy around. So I think, for me, the evidence is so clear. The relational networks is most important. The ripple effect it has for global science policy and the challenge that we have to face in our individual countries, but as on this global village is pretty important, and the light should be shining really brightly on what's happening here. And if there's a way that I can leverage and amplify, then I feel like it's my responsibility and obligation as part of the ISAP. So miigwech and kia ora.
I had a very distant Irish relative once famously say that the brain drain from New Zealand to Australia increased the average intelligence of both countries. It was, yeah, very distant. The thing which impresses me is that the Aotearoa mahi is unique. It is innovative and not found anywhere else in the world. But that doesn't mean that it should operate in isolation. We are part of a global village. Araha introduced us to the 33 different knowledge types yesterday. And I think that there's a lot of cross-learning that's going to come out of what Stacey called the cultural intelligence, which is developed through this challenge. And it's a really important part of what's been produced in the second tranche. And I guess we've heard today from Sarah, who talked about the knowledge that she had gained and could take back to the world of engaging with people before engaging with the science and the environment. Hannah talked about travelling to the US, and we heard about, with the tuna, the Indigenous First Nations people of Australia who came and visited. So we've seen a little bit of that global positioning, but I think the challenge is that we could be seeing a lot more, and I guess I'd like to see and challenge you to know who your ambassadors are internationally as you go forward, because there's so much that you have done particularly around that cultural intelligence, which is just so unique to science. And science is for everyone, and we need to be decolonising it as much as we possibly can. It's the pursuit and application of knowledge and understanding, and that should be for everyone. And what's being done through the challenge and here in Aotearoa is absolutely unique, and you need to be telling the world about it. And we do, but you need to find ambassadors yourselves and work internationally. So that would be my comment.
Sure, yeah. And actually, I might just touch on one of the questions that's come up here around advice for early career researchers who are uncertain and where do we go from here to maintain this momentum. And I really think one of the real outcomes, and I hope one of the enduring legacies of the challenge, has been to produce a cohort of early career researchers who are embedded with the idea of doing science differently, engaging with community and blending Māori and traditional approaches to create real on-the-ground impact in their science. And I think the last 2 days have illustrated the depth to which that's been achieved over the last 5 years. But it also creates a real challenge because, and I think in many instances, those connections and those relationships that you develop often come from the one-on-one, sitting down and talking with people, and we don't operate in a science system that encourages the maintenance and ongoing connection. We live in a science system that funds you for 3 years, and then you have to, as an early career researcher, have to shift to another project. And I don't have an answer for how to deal with that, but I see that as one of the real challenges of maintaining what's gone on here in the challenge. How do we maintain and create pathways for early career researchers to come out of Masters and PhD programs and to continue onwards? And I think it's especially a challenge here because one of the pathways that early career researchers here in Aotearoa in the past have done is to go overseas and get postdoctoral experience and research experience. It's what I did, and it's actually what most of the researchers that I'm familiar with that came back to Aotearoa to work here did as well. And the challenge with that is that to be competitive overseas, you need to do the traditional science. You need to be producing the publications. You need to be... And so I'm sure that in the group of researchers that are coming through here, there's a lot of insight into how you balance the demands of doing on-the-ground impactful research that requires that dedication and input into developing those relationships, how you balance that up with also the need to do that traditional science and to continue on with produce those research publications. And I think one thing that would be really nice to come out of the challenge at the end here is to get those insights from early career researchers as how they've managed to balance those demands and how we could use those learnings then to basically ensure that this cohort of researchers that come through have got those skills to make them competitive internationally.
Well, and I think as Catherine was saying, I mean, this is a place where that change, that evolution to really looking at doing science co-led with community is happening quickly and happening. One of the questions here is, are we behind or ahead? Sort of both. In some ways, I think well ahead in many places, although I would say Canada's doing a tremendous job as well. I think, we're a little more challenged in Australia, but we're wanting to move in this direction and people are moving in this direction. But because of the effort that it requires to have impact, and it's crucial to go there, as Richard says, keeping the base metrics, which are still the ones which internationally are most recognised, for good or bad, it's real, means that the pioneers have to try and do both. And it's hard being a pioneer, and you are the pioneers. And trying to do both. There's a generation that needs to be unicorns, right? They need to have this amazing set of skills and still have those science metrics so you can take the message to other places. And it's challenging being that generation that has to do it, and you are that generation. But the pride and the strength in this room around what's been achieved is impressive. And it's not only to go internationally, but also now to move this into different fields of research. And as I said, up until a couple of months ago, I looked really relaxed because I'm not anymore. I was the director of the National Collections, and it's never been a more exciting time to work in that space. Collection science is changing really rapidly, driven by genomics, high throughput digitisation, artificial intelligence, data science, data integration. You know, we're hooking up the world's 2.5 billion, 3 billion specimens with all of these data layers, but we're not doing it in the context of the things you're talking about here as well as we should. And this is a place where there are legacy collections collected from Indigenous land, and we need to think about how we deal with these things, how are the data exposed, what do we do with genomics data. And so there's the opportunity, I think, to contribute not only to these two areas of science around biodiversity and invasion biology and pests and predators internationally, but to move sideways into some of these emerging areas like collections-based science, bioprospecting, and there's a huge impact you can have. But I agree with Richard that the challenge is for this generation trying to be that generation of unicorns who have to work twice as hard as everybody else. So you've got both sets of metrics in your pocket when you can go and be that group who do it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just going to echo that as an early career researcher, I think being part of BioHeritage made my prospects a lot more, I was a lot more competitive and had a lot more opportunity because we had the opportunities to write grants and lead and learn at the same time. I think BioHeritage early career people should really be flexing because of the amount of relational labor and experience you gain by being in this, community, by building, rich relationships that are authentic and communities that might also claim you back. I think when we talk about doing science differently, I think make your CVs as different as possible so that you are incomparable to other people you might be competing with by very traditional metrics. So I think, I just wanted to mihi to BioHeritage who encouraged us to in our home, my home lab, but here where we're writing grants with farmers, put that on your CV, translating documents, put a DOI on it, work with information people. I think the next generation has this diverse set of skills and they're continually teaching me, and I think we need all of those skills and gifts and the permission and the agency that BioHeritage has now created this culture of it. So now rather than asking, can we be different, I think I just love seeing when different happens, seeing all of the different gifts that the youth bring and the next generation brings, because that also empowers me to engage the system that we're in and try and change it while we're here. So I think, for example, so I think if there are early career people here, that's what gives me a lot of hope. And I just wanted to meet to the people who reminded me that this is why we're here. I think a lot of the generation, we're not just chasing a job. This is our life and our future and what we want to pass on to our ancestors. And that will make us hopefully competitive with whatever challenges that we face, because we can only do it together. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, anyway, that's all I want to say is I feel like BioHeritage early careers are pretty amazing.
Hey, well, guess what? That's time. We're between you and coffee and one last presenter, but I want to thank the panel, and please catch up with them at coffee to discuss this more. I think there's a lot of connections to explore. So thanks to the panel.
Thank you.
Kia ora koutou katoa, amazing panel and really good questions. So one more time for everybody. Please put your hands together.